Skeleton Crew. No, not that one. Stephen King's Skeleton Crew is a 1985 short story collection containing some of his finest works of short fiction. It features 22 stories, including one of his most popular novellas, The Mist. And while I do love The Mist and its 2007 adaptation, quick aside by the way, I was offered the role as an extra in the 2017 series. I would have been a football player, but I wasn't home when they were filming. It does end up somewhat overshadowing the other stories in the collection. There's so many other stories worth paying attention to in Skeleton Crew, and one of my favorites and something I may revisit in a future video is The Jaunt, more sci-fi than Stephen King usually is. Today, however, we are going to be looking at King's recently adapted story, The Monkey. The trailer for the movie made me immediately interested with its tongue-in-cheek Final Destination style carnage, and the creepy toy monkey, of course, at its center is a lot of fun. However, after reading the short story, I have to say, I was pretty surprised how serious in tone it all is, and despite its somewhat silly supernatural premise, like many King stories, there's a lot more going on with the monkey than you might think. This is a story about grief, obsession, and above all, fate. We're going to briefly recap the story, however, I do strongly encourage you to give it a read. It's short, and there's even a great audiobook reading performed by Matthew Broderick. However, if you want just the basics, we'll go over them now. The story jumps between the past and the present as we follow our protagonist, Hal. After the death of his aunt Ida, he brings his wife Terry and two sons, Dennis and Petey, classic Stephen King children names, to clean out her home. His son Dennis finds an antique cymbal-banging monkey toy that fills Hal with dread. Hal first found this monkey himself as a child and recalls how it brought misfortune or death every time it would activate seemingly at random. His babysitter and her friend died in a shootout, his older brother Bill's best friend Charlie was killed by a drunk driver, and his mother died from a brain embolism, all corresponding to when the monkey would activate. Every time Hal disposed of it, however, the monkey would inexplicably return, leading to the deaths of Hal's friend Johnny falling from a treehouse and his Aunt Ida's dog spontaneously bleeding from the eyes. Hal has an extended break from the cursed toy when he throws it down a dry well near their home, only for Dennis to discover it in the present. The toy haunts Hal as he dreads its inevitable activation and attempts to dispose of it several times. The story concludes with Hal taking the monkey to a nearby lake, bringing it onto a rowboat, paddling it out to the deepest part of the lake as a storm begins forming above. Surprise, surprise, as the monkey's cymbals begin to clang, the boat starts falling apart. He dumps the toy into the lake as the waves become more violent and the boat breaks down beneath him. He's barely able to survive, making it to shore, and finally, hopefully, escaping the curse of the monkey. The story ends with a newspaper article about how hundreds of fish in the lake had inexplicably died shortly after. Those are the cliff notes. Again, I'm going to recommend that you read the short story so that you can get all additional details, but my favorite aspect of the story is the reader interpretation. What does it all mean? First, we need to look at the monkey itself. Where does it come from? What was its source of power? Well, aside from a made in Hong Kong stamp on its foot, the monkey's origins are never explained, something I have a feeling King would have attempted and ultimately failed if this were expanded into a novel. I do think Stephen King sometimes over-explains when it comes to the supernatural. I recently read Pet Sematary, sort of a great example of that, but it's speculated early on in the story that the toy could have belonged to Hal's absent father and could have even been the cause of his absence. Either way, it's a fun play on an ancestral sin. After all, when the monkey makes its return at the beginning of the story, it's discovered not by Hal, but rather his own children, and it's made intentionally unclear if the curse was broken at the end of the story after it all. Let's talk about the power the monkey possesses, a power which even Hal grapples to understand. The activation of the toy appears to be completely at random and impossible to prevent. The toy appears to be broken initially, but then functions on its own, corresponding with each death. But it also has an addictive quality where, despite the unease the monkey creates in those who find it, they're still compelled to try winding it up, even knowing the consequences. At certain points, Hal envisions conversations with the monkey where he's compelled to turn the key and accept his fate, creating a fun codependent dynamic between Hal and the toy. Whenever I read Stephen King's novels, I often contextualize them with his well-documented personal struggles relating to specifically alcoholism and drug abuse. He was at the height of his addiction in the early 1980s, writing books like Cujo and also this short story, and I'm not sure if this was intentional, but the idea of A curse passed down through family, which is intoxicating in the way the monkey begs to be played with, but which inevitably causes harm. It's not a bad metaphor for alcohol abuse. It kind of reminds me of the novel for The Shining, where the character is sort of struggling against something inextricably part of himself, which ends up being portrayed as the supernatural. Also, you often hear addiction referred to as having the monkey on your back. Anyway, once Hal rediscovers the monkey, his suppressed memories of the trauma he endured as a child are drip-fed to him. This is something King often plays with, the idea of the past returning to haunt adult characters through their memory. One of the most popular examples would be with the Loser Club, the gang from It. Both stories feature adult characters remembering a supernatural threat and the traumatic childhood experiences it caused, despite their attempts to forget and move on. They usually have to confront their threat directly to overcome their personal trauma. The big difference here is the ambiguity of whether or not Hal's solution was effective. The Losers Club were able to find the courage to confront it and physically defeat the entity. As I alluded to, it's left unclear at the end of the story whether the monkey's curse was broken, as it's seemingly linked to his fate, and following the conclusion of the story, it appears inevitable that somebody will investigate why all those damn fish ended up dying. Is it only a matter of time before the monkey is recovered and creates a new set of circumstances to return to Hal? You gotta wonder, and this raises an interesting question as to why the monkey has this connection with our protagonist. It's very possible that, like many characters King writes, Hal has his own psychic abilities he's even unaware of. The most popular example is Danny Torrance's character from The Shining. His connection to these abilities are much stronger than most in King's world, and as fellow psychic, or as he refers to it, another person that shines, Dick Halloran explains at the beginning of the novel that many people have the shine to them and they aren't even aware. Some shine more than others. We even saw this to a degree in the last Stephen King novella we discussed, The Langoliers. Hal could possibly fall into the fairly common Stephen King camp of being clairvoyant and thus more of an appealing victim to a cursed object, sort of a beacon of psychic energy attracting the monkey, not unlike continuing the Shining connection, the Overlook Hotel. The Overlook becomes more powerful in the presence of those who have the shine, making Danny a desirable victim to satiate its hunger. The same could be said about the monkey. And when in the thing's presence, Hal is continuously haunted by visions of potential death, almost as if it's constantly rolling the dice to try to determine how the future will unfold. The fun of this story is that we don't have all the answers. Even Hal is an unreliable narrator. The memories are told in a questionable order, and it could be possible that everything is coincidence. This could all be in his head, and maybe the monkey is a physical representation of all the grief he experienced throughout his childhood, returning to him following one more death. Either way, I'm very much looking forward to the movie. The trailer was great. I saw it on the big screen before catching Hard Eyes, which, by the way, I gave it 3 out of 5 on Letterboxd. You guys can look up Eckhart's Ladder on Letterboxd. I've just started it this year, but that's all I've got. Let me know your thoughts on this short story and any future Stephen King works you'd like to see discussed on the channel. The obvious one is Dark Tower. I got a lot of reading if we're gonna go that route. See you guys next time.